I discovered my brother's deception after our father's death, and the truth changed everything. Reddit stories. Before I dive in, let me give you a little background. My family wasn't perfect, but from the outside, we looked like the picture of upper, middle-class stability. We had the big house with the white fence, the family vacations every summer, the joint Christmas cards we sent out like clockwork. My father was a corporate lawyer, the kind who always wore polished shoes and came home with the Bluetooth headset still buzzing in his ear. My mother stayed at home, took pride in keeping our lives orderly and bright, and had this uncanny way of making you feel watched even when she wasn't in the room. I had one sibling, my older brother, Eric. Tall, athletic, golden-haired. He had the kind of confidence that people mistook for leadership and the kind of charm that made adults smile indulgently when he skipped lines or borrowed without asking. We grew up in a quiet New England suburb. Everything about our neighborhood seemed composed, almost curated. Even our street's name, Maple Hollow Lane, sounded like something out of a family sitcom. But beneath that perfectly trimmed lawn was something festering. It took me years to understand it. From as early as I can remember, I was the one who followed rules. I cleaned my room. I said thank you. I sat quietly through family dinners. Eric didn't. He was chaos in sneakers. He had this wildness in him, something that couldn't be explained away as youthful energy. He stole money from our parents' wallets, skipped school, once took Dad's BMW and crashed it into a fire hydrant. And yet, he was always forgiven. Always? I remember the first time I realized things weren't fair. I was maybe 10, he was 13. We were playing Monopoly. He cheated, of course, slipped himself money under the table, palmed properties, the works. I caught him. I told Mom. She sighed, then laughed, like it was cute. That's just Eric being Eric. But when I spilled a glass of juice on the carpet later that week, I got grounded for a month. The double standard became a pattern. When Eric flunked a math test, he got a tutor. When I brought home a B+, my parents sat me down and asked if something was wrong. Eric got into fights at school. He's just passionate. I cried once in public and my mother whispered, "Control yourself, people are watching." By the time we were both in college, the differences between us had deepened into canyons. Eric went to a small liberal arts college in Vermont where he majored in creative ventures, or some nonsense. He burned through his allowance and called home for more every other week. I went to a state university on a partial scholarship, worked part-time at the library, and graduated with honors. Nobody sent me a cake. When I was 24 and just starting my job at a tech firm, our father had his first heart attack. It shook him. He wasn't the kind of man who liked being reminded of mortality. After the surgery, he changed, became more withdrawn, more careful. He started talking to me about estate planning, about how he wanted to make things right. We sat down one weekend to go over his will. He told me what he wanted to leave behind, how he wanted the house sold, and how the money should be split. That's when he said it, "Eric can't handle responsibility. I love him, but he'll waste it all." He told me I'd be the executor. I nodded. It felt heavy, but also right. He revised the will 6 months later, made it airtight, filed it with a lawyer friend of his. I saw the papers myself. Everything was clear. And then, just like that, a year later, he was gone. A second heart attack. This one fatal. He died in his sleep, in that big house he'd bought with so much pride. We buried him on a cold March morning. The funeral was gray and bitter, and I remember Eric showing up late, reeking of cologne and something else. Grief. Whiskey. Mom wasn't doing well. She was there in body, but it was like something in her had fractured. She stopped cooking, stopped answering the phone. Eric moved in with her within weeks, said she needed help, but he spent most of the time locked in the den, smoking who knows what and blasting old Rolling Stones records. I tried to start the estate process as Dad had wanted, called the lawyer, gathered the paperwork, but something was off. Eric wouldn't give me the keys to the study. He said they were lost. Mom, in her days, just waved me off. The will. The one I had seen with my own eyes had vanished. And then, just like that, another one appeared. This new version was different. It left everything to Mom. Nothing unusual about that. But it named Eric as the sole beneficiary upon her death. No mention of me. No trustee oversight. Nothing. When I questioned it, Eric just smirked and said, "Guess Dad had a change of heart." I went back to the lawyer who had the original copy. Goen, retired, moved to Arizona. His assistant said the files had been transferred to the family. I hadn't received anything. The digital backups, wiped. The office had been downsizing. It was a perfect storm of vanishings. I confronted Mom. She blinked at me slow and foggy, like I was speaking another language. "Your father knew what he was doing," she murmured. That was all she said. I don't know if she believed it or if she'd been coached. Weeks passed. Then months. I tried to contest the will, but without a copy of the original, and with the new one signed and notarized, there wasn't much I could do. The lawyer who notarized it. An old friend of Eric's from college, of course. The house got renovated. Eric got a new car. I saw photos on Instagram of him vacationing in Maui. Meanwhile, I was still living in a cramped apartment, juggling bills, trying to keep my sanity intact. Every time I reached out, I was met with silence. Mom stopped answering. My calls, my emails, my texts, gone into the void. Then came the worst part. One day, I got a letter in the mail. Certified. It was from Eric's new attorney. Apparently, he had one now. They were politely requesting that I stop harassing the family and cease all legal inquiries unless I wanted to face a defamation suit. The message was clear: go away or get buried. And I almost did. I almost walked away from it all. It wasn't worth the pain. It wasn't worth the betrayal. But something gnawed at me. Something didn't sit right. You see, there's one thing Eric didn't know. The night Dad told me about the will, the original one, he also gave me something else. A USB stick, he said. Keep this safe, just in case. I had thrown it into an old jewelry box and forgotten about it for months. But after that letter, I dug it out. And that's when everything changed. At first, I didn't think much of the USB drive. It was one of those cheap promotional ones, the kind you get at corporate conferences or stuffed into gift bags. No label, no markings, just a worn plastic case with a sliding metal cover. I'd almost tossed it more than once over the years, forgetting what it was or assuming it held nothing important. It had been sitting in my jewelry box, tucked under a broken necklace and a pair of old earrings I hadn't worn since college. But that night, after I got the letter from Eric's lawyer, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept looping through the years. My father's serious tone, his tired eyes when he said, "Just in case." I plugged the USB stick into my laptop, not expecting much. A single folder popped up. Inside it, 3 files. One was a scanned PDF labeled Phenylwildex-D21. The second was a voice memo. The third was a video. I clicked the PDF first. It was the original will, the one I'd seen with my own eyes. Signed, witnessed, notarized, everything, clear as day. My father had left 70% of the estate to be split between charitable foundations and my future children, held in a trust I would manage. The remaining 30% was split between Mom and Eric, with explicit clauses that Eric receive only monthly stipends to avoid compulsive or self-destructive spending. My name appeared throughout, over and over again, as executor, as trustee, as beneficiary. I sat back, heart pounding. I hadn't imagined it. It was real. I had proof. Then I opened the audio file. My father's voice crackled through my earbuds. It sounded like it had been recorded on a phone. Muffled, rushed, but undeniably him. "If you're listening to this," he began, "then something's gone wrong. I want you to know I tried to do what was right. I know Eric, I know his patterns. And I know your mother won't stop him. She never could. This will is the final version. If anything happens, if it disappears, don't let them shut you out." There was a pause. I heard the rustle of paper. Then, in a quieter voice, he added, "He's capable of more than you think. Be careful." I couldn't breathe. My father, stoic, logical, never prone to melodrama, sounded afraid. Then I opened the video. It was filmed in the study. Dad sat behind his desk, wearing a sweater I remembered from that winter. His expression was grave. He stared directly into the camera. "I don't know how else to say this," he said. "Eric came to me last week, said he wanted early access to the inheritance. I refused. He got angry, threatened to find another way. I'm making this video so there's a record. If anything happens to me, if this will vanishes, know that it wasn't an accident." He paused, leaned forward. "He's my son. I love him, but love doesn't mean blindness." I sat in stunned silence for a long time. This changed everything. I had proof, not just of the original will, but of motive, intent, even a potential threat. If this got to the right people, Eric's fraud wouldn't just unravel. It might lead to criminal charges. But I had to be careful. Eric wasn't stupid. Reckless, yes. Arrogant, definitely. But not stupid. If he caught wind that I had this, he'd move fast. Maybe even faster than before. I made copies of the files immediately. Stored them in multiple places, an encrypted folder in the cloud, another on an external drive I hid in a book safe. Then I went to see a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. A bulldog named Shapiro who specialized in contested estates and had a reputation for ripping fraud apart like tissue paper. He listened to everything without interruption, watched the video twice. When it ended, he looked at me and said, "We've got him." Within a week, we filed a motion to reopen the estate. We submitted the USB files as evidence. The judge granted a temporary freeze on all estate assets, including the house, the trust, and every account under Eric's control. It happened so fast Eric didn't even know what hit him until he showed up at my door. It was a Thursday. Late, I heard the knock before I saw the headlights outside. When I opened the door, he was standing there with that same crooked grin he'd worn since childhood. But there was something else in his eyes, something cold. "Mind if we talk?" he asked. I didn't answer, just stepped aside. He walked in like he owned the place, scanned the room, then turned to me. "So, you found something?" I said nothing. He laughed. "You know, Dad always did love his dramatic gestures. USB stick." "Really?" I said nothing. He walked over to the couch, sat down, stretched his arms over the back. "You think this is going to end the way you want? You think lawyers and judges and files are going to fix this?" I finally spoke. "I think the truth fixes things. Eventually." He looked at me for a long time. Then he stood, walked toward the door, and paused. "You don't know what you're starting," he said. "Just remember that." And then he was gone. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Court filings, depositions. My mother, when summoned to testify, claimed she remembered nothing about either will. "It was all so confusing," she said. "I just let the boys handle it, But her voice trembled. Her eyes darted toward Eric every time she spoke. Then came the bombshell. During discovery, Shapiro found something unexpected. Eric had used my father's old laptop to draft the second will. He'd tried to erase the metadata, but he wasn't as tech-savvy as he thought. The timestamps betrayed him. The document had been created weeks after my father's death. That was enough. The judge threw out the second will, reinstated the original. Eric's access to the estate was revoked. An investigation began, but it wasn't over. Not even close. A few days after the ruling, I went back to the house, our childhood home, to collect a few things. I had permission. The locks had been changed. Eric wasn't supposed to be there, but he was. The lights were off. I walked through the foyer, past the kitchen, toward the study. That's when I heard it. The sound of drawers being opened, papers rustling. A low curse. I stepped into the room. Eric was crouched by the desk, flashlight in one hand, drawer in the other. He froze when he saw me. "What are you doing here?" I asked. He stood slowly. His face was pale. "Just looking for something." "You're not supposed to be here." He didn't move. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then he said, quietly, "There's something else. Something Dad hid? You don't know the whole story." I blinked. "What are you talking about?" He stepped forward. There was another file, not on the USB, in the house. I saw him hide it in the wall safe, but I never found the code. My stomach twisted. What file? He hesitated. Then, something about the company, about Mom, about why he really changed the will. That's when I remembered. The old safe behind the painting in Dad's study. I hadn't thought about it in years. Eric turned to leave, but then paused and looked back. "You think this is about money?" he said. "But it's never been about that. You'll see." He left. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I went back to the house the next morning, legally this time. The locksmith met me there. We opened the safe. Inside, among a few old documents and a vintage watch, was a sealed envelope labeled in my father's handwriting, "For the truth." "When you're ready." I took a breath, tore it open, and what I found inside changed everything I thought I knew about my family. I held the envelope for what felt like an eternity before opening it, my fingers trembling just enough to betray the storm in my chest. The paper had yellowed slightly, its edges curling inward as if it had aged with purpose, waiting for this very moment. My father's handwriting, sharp, deliberate, unmistakably his, read, "For the truth. When you're ready." I was ready, or at least I thought I was. Inside was a stack of papers folded neatly together and a small flash drive taped to the inner flap. I unfolded the pages first. The top sheet was a letter, dated 4 months before his death. "If you're reading this, then something has come to light that I tried to keep buried. Maybe it couldn't stay hidden forever. I only ask that you don't judge until you've read everything." I sank into the leather chair behind the desk. The same chair he used to sit in when reviewing contracts, when scolding us, when poring over tax forms while sipping scotch, and continued reading. "Years ago, before either of you were born, I made a choice that altered everything. Back then, I was a different man, young, ambitious, newly married to your mother. I thought I could separate my personal life from business. I was wrong. I got involved with a woman during a high-stakes corporate merger. It was supposed to be a fling. It wasn't. She got pregnant, but my heart stuttered. I wanted to do the right thing. But your mother found out. She was furious, not at me, oddly enough, but at the idea that the other woman might come forward, might threaten the image we'd worked so hard to build. She demanded silence. We paid her off, handsomely. She signed a non-disclosure agreement and moved away. But I didn't stop thinking about the child. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I skimmed ahead, looking for a name. I tried to keep track from afar. School records, medical bills, I supported him. Quietly, his name was never added to mine, but I knew him. I visited once, anonymously. I watched him from a distance. He looked just like me. And then, years later, when his mother died, he reached out. He knew. I don't know how. But he knew. There it was. A name, scrawled halfway down the second page. Eric. The room tilted. I reread it once, twice, 10 times. My brain refused to accept the truth, even as it stared me in the face. Eric wasn't my full brother. He was my half-brother. He wasn't my mother's son. I kept reading. Your mother refused to let him live with us. Said it would ruin everything. So I sent him to boarding school. Paid for everything. Introduced him slowly. Told people he was our adopted nephew from a distant cousin. Eventually, the lie just settled in like wallpaper. He was part of the family, but always different. You noticed. Of course you did. But tears burned behind my eyes. It made sense now. The double standards. The unspoken distance. The way Mom looked through him at holidays, her smile always slightly brittle when he was in the room. I thought I could balance it all. I thought if I loved you both enough, it wouldn't matter. But I failed you. And I failed him worse. When I finally wrote the will, I tried to correct things. I wanted you to have control because you've always been steady. But I also knew Eric would fight. He's got your mother's fire and none of your discipline. I'm sorry I left you to deal with this alone. I set the letter down. It felt like my lungs had collapsed. My brother, my half-brother, had lived a lie his entire life. And while I was busy tallying up every slight and injustice, he was living in a house with people who only half accepted him. A father who kept him close but secret. A mother who barely tolerated his presence. I understood his rage. But understanding wasn't the same as forgiving. I turned to the flash drive, plugged it in. There were 3 files. The first was a DNA test, taken 2 decades ago. My father's name, Eric's name. A red line drawn under 99.97% probability of paternity. The second was a scanned NDA signed by a woman named Angela Rowe, Eric's biological mother. The third was a video. This one was different from the first, less formal. Shot with a handheld camcorder. My father and Eric much younger, maybe 12 or 13, standing at a park bench. You could hear traffic, the wind in the mic. Dad looked at him and said, "You're old enough to hear it now. You're mine. You've always been mine. But no one else can know." "Not yet?" Eric nodded slowly. "Does that mean I don't get to call you Dad?" There was a pause. My father looked away. "Only when we're alone." I stopped the video. I couldn't watch anymore. Everything I thought I knew about our family had fractured, and beneath that fracture was something dark, something cruel. I didn't sleep that night. I went back to Shapiro the next morning and told him everything, showed him the documents, the files, the DNA test. He leaned back in his chair, hands steepled, and said, "Well, this explains a lot." But even he seemed at a loss for how to proceed. Because here's the thing, legally, none of it changed the estate. The will was valid. Fraud had been committed. The courts had ruled in my favor. But morally, ethically, the waters were now muddy as hell. Eric hadn't just been greedy. He'd been desperate. And I started to wonder, had I misjudged him? Had everyone? I decided to meet him, not as his adversary, not as the executor of our father's estate, but as his brother. He didn't want to meet at first. I had to send the video clip. Not the whole thing, just enough to remind him that I knew the truth now. We met at a diner halfway between our cities. It was raining, the kind of dull, steady drizzle that turns everything gray. He looked different, older, tired. He slid into the booth without saying a word. I didn't say anything either. Then, finally, he asked, "So you saw it?" I nodded. He laughed bitterly. "Took you long enough." I didn't know. No one ever did. He stirred his coffee, watching the swirl of cream. I used to lie awake at night wondering what I did wrong. Why I was the one always in trouble. Why she never hugged me. Why you got praise and I got silence. I swallowed. She wasn't your mother. But I know. But I didn't want her to be. I just wanted to matter. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, really saw him. Not as the golden boy who never followed rules, not as the spoiled screw-up who coasted on charm, but as someone who had been set adrift before he even knew what the word meant. "You could have told me," I said. He shook his head. I was ashamed, angry. I thought maybe if I took it all, if I won, then maybe I'd finally feel like I belonged. "But you already did." He looked at me, eyes red-rimmed. "Did I?" We sat in silence. Eventually, I pushed a folder toward him. "This is everything, the files. I made copies. You deserve to have them too." He didn't touch it at first. Then, slowly, he pulled it toward him. "What now?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think we start with telling the truth." He nodded. And for the first time in a long time, I saw something new in his face. Not defiance, not bitterness. Hope. It would be poetic to say that from that rainy diner meeting, my brother and I reconciled, finally bridged by truth and mutual pain. But real life rarely offers such clean endings. After I handed him the folder, our father's letter, the DNA test, the video evidence, I hoped it would be enough to settle the war, enough to bring some kind of peace. But peace was never Eric's language. For the first few weeks, things were eerily calm. The estate proceedings had been finalized, the rightful will reinstated, and most of the assets locked in a trust under my management. Eric stopped trying to challenge the ruling. He even sent me a single-line email that read, "Do what you think is fair." But at first, I took it as a sign of surrender, of growth, maybe even guilt. I should have known better. 3 months after that meeting, I received a letter from a private foundation. They claimed to have been in contact with Eric, said he had recently donated a significant portion of his personal funds to support children of corporate scandals. Whatever that meant. They included a press clipping, a shiny pamphlet with his picture on it, and a glowing profile of his newfound purpose. It wasn't just an act of charity. It was image laundering. Then came the podcast interview. He'd booked a spot on a niche podcast hosted by a self-styled investigative journalist. The episode dropped one Tuesday morning without warning. It was titled, "The Heir Who Wasn't: One Man's Journey Through Betrayal, Bloodlines, and Broken Promises." I listened, alone. Every word punched a hole in the version of the truth I thought we'd agreed upon. Eric never said my name directly. He never mentioned the estate by title. But anyone who knew us, anyone who had grown up with us or worked with our father, would recognize the story. He painted himself as a victim of erasure, a boy caught between two worlds, a son acknowledged only in secret, then shut out when it mattered most. He hinted at a sibling raised in privilege, and mother who never claimed him. The worst part, he told just enough truth to make the lies feel real. By the end of the episode, I felt something cold settle inside me. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was fear. Eric hadn't walked away from the estate. He had stepped around it, and now he was rewriting the family history in his own words, distributing it on his terms, and gaining followers, sympathy, and attention. Then came the second blow. Our mother died. It wasn't unexpected. Her health had been declining steadily since our father's death. But it still landed hard. She passed in her sleep in a private care facility I had been funding, surrounded by strangers. Eric didn't call me. I found out from the funeral home. When I arrived, the arrangements were already made. The service had been scheduled, the obituary published, and the guest list curated by Eric. I wasn't mentioned in the write-up, just survived by her devoted son, Eric. I stood in the back of the church during the service, numb. People came up to me afterward, confused. Some whispered condolences. Others asked if I was the cousin. I left without speaking to him. A week later, the lawyer called. Eric had filed a motion to claim our mother's remaining assets. On paper, they were meager. Her personal account, some jewelry, a few antique furnishings. Nothing compared to the estate. But the motion included something else. A handwritten letter, allegedly written by my mother before her death. In it, she claimed Eric was her true son, the only one who stood by her in her final days, and that she wished for him to inherit the family heirlooms and final say over her personal effects. I knew immediately the letter wasn't real. It was her handwriting, yes, but it was copied from an old birthday card, a message she had once written to Eric, verbatim, lifted from the card and spliced into a makeshift farewell. I confronted him again. This time we met not at a diner but at our parents' house. Now in legal limbo, still technically under the trust's control, he stood in the foyer like he had never left. "Really?" I said, holding up the fake letter. He shrugged. She would have said it if she could. Consider it editorial assistance, Doc. You're fabricating our family history. I'm clarifying it, he said calmly. For the record, for the future. I stared at him, wondering if he even believed his own words anymore. You always needed the truth to look like a balance sheet, he said. Black and white, right and wrong. But real life here. It's met stories, not spreadsheets. Stories aren't facts, I said. No, he agreed, turning to leave. But they're what people remember. But for weeks after that rainy diner meeting, something shifted between Eric and me. It wasn't perfect. Too many years of buried resentment for that. But we weren't enemies anymore. There were long phone calls, awkward attempts at conversation. Even a few laughs that felt almost real. The kind that made you wonder if you were getting something back that you never really had in the first place. We'd both grown up under the illusion of family. The perfect lawn, the polite dinner talk, the photo albums full of forced smiles. but the truth had burned away that illusion like a match to tissue paper. What remained was raw, but maybe real. That was the hope, anyway. The documents stayed with us, copies stashed in safe places like talismans. We knew we held the key to a past that had been carefully engineered by people who thought secrets were stronger than truth. But the storm wasn't over, not by a long shot. It started with a phone call from Shapiro. He sounded irritated, which was rare. "I just got word from probate," he said. "There's a motion being filed by your mother." I blinked. "For what?" "She's contesting the original will. Claims it was signed under duress." I almost laughed. That's ridiculous. Dad wrote that version months before he died. He even made a video. I know. But she's not doing this to win. She's doing it to stall. The longer it drags out in court, the longer everything's frozen. Your role as executor, the estate dispersal, even the trust. She's choking the process. You need to prepare. And just like that, the fragile calm between Eric and me shattered. Not because he was behind it. He wasn't. But because the lawsuit put him back in the spotlight. Again, I could see the pressure building him all over again. The guilt. The anger. He stopped replying to texts. Voicemails went unanswered. And when I finally drove out to see him, he wouldn't open the door. That's when I started to realize our mother wasn't acting out of grief or confusion. She was acting with precision. And she knew exactly what she was doing. I went to her house, our childhood home, now surrounded by silence and overgrown hedges. She answered the door with a blank expression, like I was a stranger. She looked thinner. Her hair was pinned up with more care than usual, but her eyes had that glassy, disconnected gleam I hadn't seen since the funeral. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I think I should be." She opened the door wider without a word. The living room looked like a museum to a family that never really existed. Framed portraits, a vase of plastic flowers, a fireplace mantel lined with dusty trophies and dried-out candles. I sat down. She remained standing. "I know everything," I said. "About Eric. About the affair. About the will." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. "And I know you're contesting the estate." "I'm protecting what your father built." "No, you're protecting a lie you've lived in for 30 years. She didn't speak. I continued, "You erased Eric. From everything. You treated him like an intruder. And when Dad tried to make it right, you tried to erase that too." As she finally moved, slow and deliberate, and sat across from me. Her voice was soft, almost gentle. "Oh, you think this is about resentment. But it's not. It's about control. I controlled the chaos. I kept this family together when your father made mistake after mistake. I raised you to be strong. I carried the burden of silence while he played the penitent saint." I stared at her, shocked. She leaned forward. "Eric is the product of betrayal. You think it's noble to embrace him now, but it's a fantasy. He will always destroy what he touches. Your father knew it. That's why he handed you the keys instead of him. But you've let sentiment cloud your judgment." "I'm not here for revenge," I said. "I'm here to end this." She looked at me, something dark flickering behind her eyes. "Oh, then you better be ready for what happens when the truth isn't convenient anymore." That was the moment I realized something vital. She wasn't just angry. She was scared of what Eric and I might become if we didn't need her lies anymore. The next few days were chaos. Legal filings, hearings, document reviews. Our father's video testimony helped, but it wasn't enough to shut everything down immediately. We were now in a battle of attrition, death by paperwork. Eric stayed silent through it all. Not out of apathy this time, but out of despair. I drove out to his place again, this time unannounced. He opened the door without a word and let me in. "You were right," he said after a long silence. "She's not fighting the will. She's fighting the idea that I ever belonged." I sat beside him. "We can't change what happened, but we can decide what happens next." Balked, he looked me with that hollow, tired gaze. "Do you really think we can fix this?" "Not all of it," I said, "but Maybe we don't have to fix everything. Maybe just enough. It was a fragile hope, but we clung to it. Together, we decided to go public, not in the media. This wasn't about spectacle, but to the extended family, to Dad's old colleagues, to the people who still thought of our family as this shining example of unity. We wrote a letter, jointly signed, explaining everything. The truth about Eric's parentage, the real contents of the will, the forgery, the battle. Some people were shocked, others weren't. A few reached out to apologize, to Eric mostly, for having believed the facade for so long. And that was the crack that started to open things, because one of those people, an old law partner of Dad's, reached out with something unexpected, a recording. He had been one of the two witnesses to the original will, and during their meeting, he had secretly recorded the conversation for his own notes, something he often did when dealing with high-value documents. It was clear, undeniable. My father describing his intentions in detail, why he was splitting the estate, why he didn't trust Eric with lump sums, why I was executor, and crucially, why he didn't want his wife interfering. It was a smoking gun. We submitted the recording to the court. Our mother's motion was dismissed within a week. The estate was released. The will stood, the trust was activated, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, something ended. But that wasn't the twist. That came a few days later, when I received a letter in the mail. No return address, handwritten, slanted cursive I hadn't seen in years. It was from our mother, not an apology, not a threat, a confession, just 2 pages long. She admitted to knowing more than she ever let on, to intercepting letters Eric's mother had sent, to fabricating lies that kept him isolated, and to one more thing. She hadn't forged the will. She hadn't altered the documents. She'd paid someone else to do it. A name was scrawled at the bottom of the second page. My father's longtime accountant. And in that moment, I understood. The game had never been between Eric and me. It had been all of them. The web of secrecy, loyalty, betrayal. It was bigger than either of us. And someone else, still hidden in the shadows, had been pulling strings long before either of us had asked any questions. The name written in our mother's shaky cursive at the end of her confession was one I recognized immediately: Arthur Glenn. For most of my life, he was just Miss R. Glenn, the accountant who came by every April like clockwork, carrying his worn leather briefcase and speaking in numbers. He had glasses that made his eyes look slightly too large, and the kind of calm, beige presence that melted into wallpaper. He handled taxes, trust funds, investment portfolios. He was a fixture, a harmless necessity. I never would have thought twice about him. Until now. I sat with the letter under a yellow kitchen light, rereading the lines again and again. She didn't forge the will. She paid someone else, Arthur Glenn. The simplicity of it was chilling. My mother had never needed to break the law herself. She had someone to do it for her. I called Shapiro immediately. I didn't even wait for formalities. Arthur Glenn, I said, my father's accountant. My mother says he forged the second will. There was a pause. I know that name, Shapiro replied slowly. Give me 2 days. What he uncovered was worse than I could have imagined. Arthur Glenn wasn't just our family's accountant. He was a quiet puppet master behind dozens of estates like ours. Over the years, he'd cultivated a reputation for being discreet, effective, and most importantly, invisible. He had a network of shell companies, falsified audits, and under-the-table connections with probate officers and notaries willing to look the other way for the right price. But none of that was public, because no one had ever spoken out. Until now. Shapiro didn't stop at research. He compiled everything: the timeline of our estate, the discrepancies between the document metadata and Arthur's digital signature, and the testimony from our mother's handwritten letter. He filed a report with the State Bar and opened a criminal complaint. 2 weeks later, Arthur Glenn was arrested. The news didn't make headlines. People like him don't cause enough noise to grab attention. But the damage was done. Investigators uncovered forged documents in 3 other estates. He cut a deal, reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation. And that's when it all came into focus. He admitted that the day after our father died, our mother called him in a panic. She told him that the original will would destroy everything, that it gave too much to the wrong people. She asked what could be done. He told her the truth, nothing, unless the original was gone. So she found a way to remove it, first from the house, then from the lawyer's office. Glenn bribed a paralegal, one of Dad's long, trusted staff, to delete the digital copy and replace it with a fabricated version. He used Eric's college friend to notarize the new will, knowing full well it was a forgery. It was surgical, precise, and nearly perfect, but not perfect enough. The USB my father gave me, the backup no one knew about, was the thread that unraveled everything. When the courts processed the criminal charges, they issued a final ruling on the estate. My father's original will was upheld as legally binding. My role as executor was restored permanently. The trust was honored exactly as he intended. Eric would receive monthly disbursements, just as Dad had planned. Structured, manageable, safe. I'd control the rest until my children, if I ever had any, came of age. The house was sold, the funds divided, the assets settled. But the money wasn't what haunted me. It was the silence that followed. Our mother disappeared from public life entirely. She sold the house and moved somewhere in the mountains. Montana, I heard, or maybe Oregon. She never gave an address. I got a postcard once, no return name, no message. Just a black and white photo of a lake, serene and endless. I still don't know if it was from her. Eric and I. Well, we tried. We started seeing each other monthly. Coffee at first, then dinner. Eventually, we even took a weekend trip. Just the two of us, no lawyers, no weight of inheritance. There were hard conversations and moments we both wished we could take back. But there were also new memories, honest ones. He never really forgave our father. Not completely. How could he? He was a secret for most of his life. But he started to forgive himself, and that was enough. One evening, over drinks, he asked me something I hadn't expected. Do you think any of it mattered? The money, the house, the trust. If we'd just known the truth from the start, would we be better off? I didn't answer right away. Then I said, maybe. But Dad didn't trust the truth. Neither did Mom. That's what ruined everything, not the secrets, the fear of them. He nodded slowly. Then maybe it's time we stopped being afraid. Years passed. I got married. Had a daughter. Named her Elise. When she turned 3, Eric gave her a stuffed bear with a red scarf. Said it reminded him of one he'd had as a kid. The moment she hugged it, something softened in him, like maybe he saw a future that didn't carry the weight of our past. I added a file to my safe at home. The letter from Dad, the DNA test, the video files. I labeled it for Elise. When you're ready. Because I'd learned something. The truth always comes out. But if it's buried too long, it doesn't just hurt the people who kept it. It scars the ones who inherit the silence. Eric eventually left the city. Bought a house near the coast. Started working with kids, mentorship programs for teenagers on probation. He said it helped him feel useful. He sent me updates now and then. Postcards, mostly. No return address. Just notes like, "This one's got your stubbornness," or "Taught a kid chess today." He cried when he lost, then laughed 5 minutes later. Maybe there's hope. I kept every single one. The last one arrived on a Tuesday. Elise was 5 by then. It had a photo of a lighthouse on the front, waves crashing against the rocks. On the back he wrote "Tell Elise her uncle's learning to fish." I finally understand what patience really means. Took me long enough. That was the last I heard from him. Not because he vanished, but because he finally found peace. And somehow, so did I. Because the real inheritance wasn't the money or the house or the trust. It was the choice to end the lie. And that, I decided, was the only family legacy worth protecting. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and like the video.